Long before the cameras ever turned on, the aspiration for dungeon stardom began with two children captivated by a screen. That vision has now become a worldwide reality, as massive crowds gather before the city's largest screens to cheer for the hero's broadcast. This rising trio of adventurers has won over the public, successfully transitioning from internet sensations to mainstream celebrities. He fondly remembers watching them with sheer admiration, documenting every step of their journey from the very beginning. Faced with the reality of his own weakness, he stepped away from the front lines to support the team as their manager. He began recording their victories, making sure to credit the team's ace for another impeccable performance within the dungeon. As he continued filming, he praised her for wiping out the entire goblin horde without sustaining a single injury. Swept up in the excitement, she lunged forward to pull him into a celebratory hug. He struggled to maintain a professional distance, even as her boundless energy threatened to overwhelm him. The celebration quickly spiraled into a clumsy fall, proving that gravity is the one opponent she consistently fails to overcome. Returning to the office, the atmosphere sours instantly as his manager lashes out over a failed business deal. The boss gripped his collar tightly, demanding an explanation for why he had passed up such a significant television opportunity for the team. As the girls prepare to take the stage, they remain oblivious to the pressure their manager is enduring behind the scenes to safeguard their reputation. He stood his ground, resisting the intense pressure to betray his friends for a quick path to fame. His superior shouted in disbelief, unable to wrap his head around why anyone would turn down such a profitable opportunity. Beads of sweat roll down his forehead as he prepares to reveal the grim reality hidden behind the glamorous invitation. He fired back, exposing that the producers had been demanding unethical favors from the girls in exchange for their airtime. The boss fixed him with a hard stare, his features tightening with annoyance rather than surprise at the explanation. As the team waits patiently in the hallway, they remain entirely unaware of the dark political maneuvering taking place behind closed doors. His superior shouted back, asserting that such compromises were standard industry practice and had to be accepted. Refusing to yield, he stood his ground and reminded his opponent that the high school students were under his protection. He understands that those with genuine power never have to lower themselves, but his team hasn't reached that level of status yet. Mocking his moral code, the boss argued that their lack of influence meant they had to exploit every resource available. Brushing off the manager's shoulder, he cautioned him that he was discarding a rare, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The older man wiped his face, visibly worn down by the sudden and inconvenient weight of his own conscience. With a threatening glare, he leans forward and questions if the manager truly wants the girls to succeed. The manager's knuckles turned white as he clenched his fist, barely managing to restrain himself from throwing a punch. He shouted that success was meaningless if it meant sacrificing their dignity to these predators. He struggled to catch his breath as a heavy silence settled over the room following the heated exchange. The boss fixed him with a frigid glare as the tension in the room reached a critical peak. The boss's gaze sharpened, signaling that the time for pleasantries had come to an end. He muttered a quiet response, maintaining an unsettling stillness that signaled trouble ahead. Without saying another word, he turned his back on the manager and walked toward the exit, effectively ending their discussion. Puzzled, he was left wondering why the explosion he had been bracing for failed to occur. In reality, the team's existing popularity was more than enough to draw major media coverage without the need for any underhanded tactics. Their parents' deep-seated influence within the industry provided a safety net that was supposed to keep them protected. However, his deceitful boss knows precisely how to sway public opinion and sidestep those legal safeguards. He smirked with the arrogance of a man who knew he held every advantage. He offhandedly noted the director's recent lack of oversight, signaling that the final obstacle in his path had been cleared. The manager pursued him, demanding to know what he was truly planning for their professional futures. The situation finally reaches its breaking point when the boss coldly informs him that his services are no longer required. Upon hearing the verdict, the girls stood frozen in shock, their faces turning pale. They stood in frozen disbelief, struggling to comprehend how easily their guardian was being discarded. As the weight of their situation finally set in, they were left completely exposed to the threats surrounding the office. He lowered his head in resignation, accepting the defeat he had anticipated the moment he chose to speak up. He had always recognized the company's deep-seated corruption, seeing it as a place where ethics were completely discarded. Despite the risks, He stood his ground and fought, giving his all to protect their dreams from people like these. Memories of their entire journey flooded back, from their early days at the training grounds to their first successful dungeon raid, all of which now felt completely meaningless. To make matters worse, the boss announced that he would be taking direct control of the team's management moving forward. His true motives were plain to see, as he viewed the girls not as skilled individuals, but as mere objects for his own entertainment. Horror fills his face as he realizes the grim reality of what management means to this predator. Driven by desperation, he turned to the girls and questioned if they were truly content with being treated as nothing more than objects. Instead of reacting with fear or outrage, the trio stood perfectly still, their unreadable expressions sending a chill through him. He offers one final warning, cautioning that sacrificing their dignity for the sake of fame is a bargain they will eventually regret. She looked up, her gaze lacking any trace of the innocence he thought he was fighting to protect. The two shared a glance, seemingly indifferent to the bleak fate the manager had just described. The moment she began to speak, she completely dismantled the image he had formed of her as a helpless victim. She offered a cheerful smile, casually dismissing his worries as if they were of no consequence. He was left utterly speechless as the mission he had undertaken to defend their honor fell apart in a single moment. She confessed that if compromising their integrity is what it takes to reach the top, she is fully prepared to pay that price. They justify their decision, convinced that compromising their values is simply the fastest way to reach the top. They dismissed his frantic warnings, telling him to stop ruining the mood and let them enjoy their big opportunity. He shouted that ultimately, their reputation as true adventurers was the only thing that mattered. However, his warnings were brushed aside, dismissed as the mere paranoia of a man who worries too much. The leader coldly reminds him that since he's been dismissed, his input no longer holds any weight. The group immediately took a liking to the new manager, drawn in by his promises of a more relaxed atmosphere and fewer restrictions. In an unsettling shift of loyalty, they began praising the predator for his composed and understanding nature. Clenching his jaw, he found that the weight of the betrayal was far more painful than any physical injury. He thought back to his 20-year-old self, recalling how he built the team known as the Riders from the ground up. Over the next 3 years, they rose through the ranks together, establishing a firm foundation of mutual trust and sharpened skills. He tightened his fist, struck by the bitter realization that his hard-earned progress was being snatched away from him. With a sharp exhale, he was forced to accept that his belief in hard work was fundamentally incompatible with their greed. He reflected on his past lectures regarding honor and punctuality, realizing those lessons had clearly never taken root. He realized that if they were truly committed to this path of corruption, he no longer had the strength to hold them back. The girls dismiss him like an annoyance, eager to begin their new, compromised lives free from his supervision. Approaching the new handler, the sharp tension between the protector and the predator was impossible to ignore. The man in the suit placed a patronizing hand on his shoulder, signaling that he was finally claiming his prize. Wearing a self-satisfied smirk, he quietly told the former manager to pack his belongings and vacate the building. The bald superior's laughter echoed from the background as he mocked him for retreating without putting up a fight. He turned away from the people he had spent his life serving, his posture weighed down by the heavy burden of defeat. He offered a final silent bow, upholding his professional composure, even as his world fell into ruin. He headed for the exit, prepared to leave the team to their fate, but a sudden movement caught his eye and brought him to a halt. The trio's most soft-spoken member remains rooted to the spot, her conscience finally beginning to weigh on her. She gripped her chest, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision ahead of her. Taking a steadying breath, she finally spoke up, her voice cutting straight through the room's self-congratulatory mood. She declared that if their guardian was leaving, she would be resigning from the team alongside him. He stands frozen at the entrance, genuinely surprised to see that someone had actually taken his lessons to heart. He watched in shock, having been certain that the corruption had already overtaken the entire group. Her determined gaze made it clear that she valued her dignity far more than a quick paycheck. Her defiant posture left the management stunned, causing the team's unity to fracture instantly. The traitorous teammate remained unbothered, her ego bolstered by the promise of easy fame and corporate sponsorship. The third member stood back, her expression tightening as she processed the betrayal unfolding right in front of her. Stunned into silence, the protagonist looked on, having fully expected to walk through those doors alone. Looking down, she summoned the resolve to challenge the very people who held power over her fate. The sleazy replacement brushed off Kaya's hesitation with a laugh, assuming she was simply confused by the new arrangement. She aggressively swats his hand away, recoiling from his touch with a look of pure repulsion. She strode past the bewildered predator with confidence, making her loyalty perfectly clear. The executive watched in stunned silence as his most valuable asset abandoned a life-changing deal just to follow a man who had been fired. Instead of reaching for the man with the money, she chose to offer her hand to the one guided by his principles. She firmly announced her decision to stay with her original manager, leaving the corporate official stammering in disbelief. As the executive reminded her that he had been dismissed, she simply inquired about what title she should use for him instead. She hooked her arm through his, securing him with a firm grip that signaled she had no intention of letting go. She playfully teased him, suggesting that Darling might actually be a fitting replacement for the manager. Her firm hold helped the flustered protagonist regain his focus amidst the sudden change in circumstances. She beams with pure delight while he turns a deep shade of red from sheer embarrassment. Furious at the rejection, the handler lashed out in frustration, unable to fathom why anyone would ever choose a failure over a proven winner. He yelled that without the agency's support, her career as a dungeon streamer was as good as over. With a calm demeanor, Kaya retorts that she has no need for their corrupt assistance, trusting only in her own hard work to succeed. Adjusting his glasses with a sneer, the man warned her that she would be stuck working minor jobs forever without his help. She fired back, asserting that remaining insignificant was preferable to sacrificing her integrity and soul for the sake of success. Silence filled the room as she delivered the harsh reality, leaving her former teammates to sit with their own shame. The other girls averted their eyes as her sharp words cut through the excuses they used to justify their betrayal. She argued that their debut would be worthless if they weren't truly prepared to survive the dungeon's dangers. Standing tall, she addressed the room, asserting that longevity in this industry is earned through genuine skill rather than simple hype. She emphasizes that cultivating a loyal following is a slow process, a reality these corporate executives have completely overlooked. Offering a final pledge of loyalty, she committed to following her manager's path, regardless of the difficulties they might face. Hidden in the shadows, the ball director watched as his expression contorted with deep-seated malice. With a menacing grin, he warned her that stepping through that door would lead to a world of pain. Glancing back, he was fully aware that he had just provoked a formidable new enemy. The boss hurls one final threat, vowing to have her blacklisted from every other agency in the city. The boss intensifies his threat, detailing the true extent of his reach across the city. He details a bleak future for her, asserting that his blacklist will ensure every door in the industry remains firmly closed. Wearing a cruel smirk, he informed her that her career as a dungeon streamer was officially over. Standing side by side, the two villains ridiculed the pair for believing they could survive without the safety net of corporate protection. Listening to the venom, the protagonist's expression steeled as his fear was gradually replaced by a rising anger. He reflected on his original motivation, thinking of the children who look up to these heroes as role models. Instead of the promised world of dreams and adventure, it proved to be a reality defined by backroom deals and exploitation. His gaze sharpened as he finally steeled his resolve to fight back. Stepping forward with resolve, he positioned himself as a physical barrier between the predator and his charge. He used his body to shield Kaya, demanding that they keep their adult corruption away from her. The boss looked up in disbelief, stunned that a man he'd just fired would have the audacity to challenge him so directly. He makes it clear that true dungeon streaming isn't about favors or connections, but the raw experience of the adventure itself. He tightened his fist, channeling his frustration into a quiet but firm vow of defiance. He roared a vow to protect her, regardless of the bridges he would have to burn to ensure her safety. Pointing directly at the establishment, he vowed to transform her into a top-tier star on his own terms. He looked back at her, his face still flushed from the adrenaline of declaring war on a giant. The villains remained frozen in silence, completely blindsided by his sheer audacity. Kaya watched him with a deep blush, her heart racing as she witnessed his fierce defense. He took her hand in a firm grip, solidifying their new alliance and signaling a definitive break from the company. Refusing to wait for a response, he pulls her along as he leads the way out of that toxic environment. The ball director finally reaches his breaking point, his face turning a deep shade of purple as he realizes he is being completely ignored. He shouted threats at their retreating figures, warning that they would be begging to return in less than a week. The remaining traders watched in silence, likely realizing they had backed the wrong side. The heavy thud of the closing door silenced the shouting, signaling the official start of their independence. The hallway fell quiet once more as the pair returned to their desks to gather their belongings. Breaking the silence, he asks if she's truly certain about teaming up with a manager who was just fired. She stared at him in pure confusion, stunned that the truth was obvious to everyone except him. He let out a long sigh as the adrenaline began to fade, finally coming face to face with the massive mountain they still had to climb. Maintaining a steady front, he urged the group to grab their equipment and clear out before security arrived. She quickly shifted her position to block his way, momentarily halting his progress. After finally cutting ties with the toxic agency, the two ventured out into the world with nothing but each other to rely on. She gripped his hand tightly, making it clear that she viewed him as a partner rather than just a manager. A wave of relief washed over her as she smiled, finally free from the corporate life that had nearly trapped her forever. He couldn't help but blush as the true weight of her absolute trust finally began to sink in. Clenching his fist, he made a silent vow to ensure her gamble wouldn't result in regret. The city stood before them, vast and imposing, yet his determination to succeed had never been stronger. With their spirits restored, the two moved forward, ready to face the world and start their journey anew. They eventually reached his modest home, a place far less extravagant than the polished dorms managed by the agency. The click of the lock finally signaled the end of what had undoubtedly been the most exhausting and stressful day of his life. As he stepped into his darkened home, the lingering adrenaline finally faded, allowing a heavy wave of exhaustion to take over. He wanted nothing more than a hot shower and a long sleep to mentally reset for the battles awaiting him. As he proceeds down the hallway, his instincts alert him to the fact that something is terribly wrong. An intense pressure suddenly filled the air, rooting him to the spot before he could even finish removing his shoes. He spun around, his gaze darting across the room as he searched for the origin of the inexplicable energy. Reality itself began to splinter right in his living room as a dungeon gate tore through the fabric of space. To understand how they arrived at this point, we must look back a few hours to their commute home. It was only late afternoon, a time he would typically spend buried under stacks of paperwork. He glanced at his phone, struck by the unfamiliar sensation of leaving work while the sun was still out. The train was packed with the hollowed-out faces of the corporate world, a grim reality he had only just managed to avoid. However, he didn't have to face his freedom alone, as Kaya leaned in to close the distance between them. Looking up with innocent curiosity, she asked what their next course of action would be. He admitted that he hadn't quite figured things out yet, as the weight of being unemployed finally began to sink in. She tilted her head, pointing out that calling him manager no longer made much sense. He dryly remarks that his current status is technically unemployed, a title that certainly lacks any professional flair. She continues to mock him with the title, clearly enjoying his visible discomfort as he is forced to face the harsh reality. Leaning in, she proposed a compromise that hinted at a much different dynamic than before. With a playful glint in her eyes, she suggests that darling would be a more fitting title for him. Acting bashful, she claimed she had a difficult time choosing between that and other terms of endearment. The protagonist struggles to keep his cool as the girl continues her unwavering advances. She pressed him to state a preference, eventually forcing him to plead for his former title just to end her teasing. Despite his attempts to correct her choice of words, she seemed firmly committed to the new affectionate nickname. Her gaze was so sharp and sincere that he found himself unable to meet her eyes. Reflecting on her past memories with the group, she realized that her laughter had always been hollow while surrounded by insincere people. Observing her now, he noticed a newfound lightness in her expression that had never been present back at the corporate dorms. With a warm smile, she expressed how genuinely happy she felt just being by his side. Her infectious joy eventually rubbed off on him, coaxing a faint, reluctant smile to his lips. This development is logical, considering they were the founding pair who built the team from the very beginning. The train rumbles forward, carrying the two fugitives away from the heart of the city and toward the promise of a new beginning. Letting out a heavy sigh, he tried to restore their professional boundaries by insisting on being addressed as the manager. Shifting the focus to business, he pointed out the immense logistical hurdles of solo dungeon diving. Kaya listened closely, her light-hearted demeanor fading into a serious expression as the reality of the situation finally took hold. She immediately mistook his genuine concern for her safety as a deep, romantic confession. She settled into her seat, her mind evidently drifting toward a fantasy world instead of the action unfolding. He urgently reminded her that the viewers were there for dungeon clears, not a dramatic soap opera. She puffed her cheeks in frustration, clearly irked that he was focusing on the crowd rather than the moment. She turned away with a pout, muttering that her only concern was for him rather than herself. In an effort to calm the situation, he explained that her safety was the essential foundation of their business strategy. The sudden validation leaves her completely flustered, her face turning bright red with affection. A silence that was both awkward and endearing settled between them as they sat side by side in the car. Internally, the manager was already weighing the immense scale of the challenges ahead. With no allies to back her up, she must now face the dungeon's terrors in complete isolation. Starting a streaming career might seem simple enough, but truly setting yourself apart in such a crowded market is a far more daunting task. He soon realized his role was to act as the cameraman, tasked with capturing the entire event using nothing but his smartphone. He risked his life by positioning himself directly in the path of the goblin blood, all to secure the perfect angle. To truly thrive as a Maycuber, one must secure high-quality footage of their most perilous dungeon clears. He stroked his chin, carefully weighing the data needed to turn their new project into a profitable success. The group was forced to face the grim reality that without an established audience, their efforts were effectively going unheard. He observed the stark contrast between her immense fighting strength and his own status as a powerless civilian. They're forced to grind through low-level dungeons just to build a track record that anyone will take seriously. He let out a heavy sigh as the weight of the logistics hit him, fully realizing the absurdity of the gamble he was taking. Before he can even settle on a strategy, she catches him off guard with a sudden revelation and a confident smirk. Expecting a simple text, he checked his phone only to discover something far more remarkable. She had already prepared their official streaming channel, fully equipped with custom branding and a verified profile. He watched in disbelief, realizing that while he was still overthinking the logistics, she had already carried them out. She hummed contentedly, clearly satisfied with her own administrative efficiency. Pumping her fists with resolve, she declared that she had no intention of being a burden in their partnership. A sincere smile touched his face as he realized he'd significantly underestimated her determination. As they headed home on the train, she was visibly brimming with excitement, energized by the prospect of their newfound independence. Matching her intensity, he clenched his fist, now fully committed to turning their ambitious dream into a reality. In a brief moment of quiet, the two rebels found solace in their shared journey against the world. As the train continues its journey, the focus of their conversation shifts toward their next steps and where they'll establish a new base. A light blush colored her cheeks as she casually asked if she could visit his home the next day. He accepted without hesitation, naturally assuming she was calling for a strategy meeting or an equipment check. However, her expression soon took on a more suggestive tone, making it clear she was prioritizing romance over her actual responsibilities. Without any regard for their public surroundings, she pins him against the train window, closing the distance between them. She lowered her voice to a whisper, teasing him with subtle suggestions that sent his heart racing. She pressed a finger to her lips, clearly amused by how easily she could now rattle her former superior. Her confidence quickly vanishes as she realizes how forward she's being, leaving her completely flustered and blushing. He lets out a nervous laugh, clearly relieved that the sudden romantic pressure has finally subsided. Quickly regaining her composure, she flashed a smile that was both innocent and menacing. As the city streaks past, the massive skyscrapers serve as a constant reminder of the corporate giants they are challenging. She offered a final wave from the station, her upbeat mood standing in stark contrast to the dreary streets around her. They parted for the evening, though the distance between them felt more like a brief pause than a final goodbye. He watched her depart, returning her wave until she eventually vanished into the evening crowd. Walking in solitude, the full weight of his reality began to settle back onto him with every stride. He blends into the sea of commuters, appearing as nothing more than an ordinary face while masking his true ambitions. He began weighing several strategies, looking for a way to circumvent the agency's blacklist and bring her the attention she deserved. He arrived at his modest apartment complex, which was set to serve as their new base of operations. As he made his way through the silent hallway, He began mentally organizing his schedule for the morning. He slid the key into the lock, completely oblivious to the fact that his quiet evening was about to be cut short. Entering his home, he fully expected to find the usual quiet and solitude of his vacant apartment. Rather than what he expected, he found a swirling vortex occupying his hallway like a strange piece of modern art. Stunned, he struggled to comprehend the impossible sight now standing in the middle of his living room. With the sequence of events fully explained, the narrative finally returns to the current crisis. His sharp managerial instincts took over, and he quickly identified the anomaly as a dungeon gate. He mentally reviewed the safety protocols he typically instilled in his team, using them to gauge the severity of the situation. The absence of any lightning discharge suggests the gate has stabilized, providing a small sense of relief. He breathed a sigh of relief, noting that as an entry-type gate, there was no risk of monsters pouring out. Deprived of his professional scanning gear, the true difficulty of the challenge remained a complete mystery. Torn between curiosity and caution, he stepped forward to investigate the strange phenomenon. The void brought the confrontation to an abrupt end, lashing out with the ferocity of a starving predator. An immense force suddenly sweeps him off his feet, dragging him uncontrollably into the dark void. He cries out in protest, though the laws of physics no longer seem to apply. Failing to catch the doorframe in time, he plummeted headfirst into the darkness. Their journey came to a sudden halt as they landed painfully against the hard stone floor. Sitting up, he quickly inspected his limbs to ensure he had survived the rough landing intact. The pain quickly vanished as he looked up, his attention captured by the unfamiliar world around him. He found himself seated in the heart of a massive cavern, surrounded by shimmering crystals. The jagged rock structures emitted a ghostly radiance that felt entirely otherworldly. For a brief moment, he found himself captivated by the striking beauty of the treacherous landscape. He slapped himself to snap out of it, reminding himself that being a tourist in a place like this is often a fatal mistake. He turned back toward the portal, realizing he needed to depart before the local wildlife arrived to investigate. He dashed toward the swirling exit, driven by a frantic need to return to the safety of his mundane apartment. Suddenly, a holographic barrier snapped into place, blocking his path with a low digital hum. A loading bar suddenly manifested in midair, a frustrating sight for anyone in a hurry. A system notification suddenly appears, announcing that he has been granted unique abilities as a special favor. He looked on in bewilderment, questioning who would be providing him with such assistance inside a dungeon. As the loading bar reached its end, the mysterious digital transaction was officially complete. A status screen materialized, revealing that his attributes were remarkably low in every category. He stopped short, struck by a sudden realization as he recalled the true extent of an adventurer's power. The system clarified that he hadn't been granted any offensive abilities, such as the power to use fire magic. To his surprise, the holographic interface designated him as a merchant, starting him off with no equipment at all. He stared in bewilderment, as the concepts of status screens and job systems were entirely foreign to this world. Scanning the shimmering crystal cavern, he questioned if such a radiant place could truly be a dungeon. The gate hummed with an ominous energy behind him, a chilling reminder that this abyss now resided within the walls of his own home. Before he could investigate further, the vortex expelled him, casting him back into reality. He hit the wooden floor with a painful thud, his journey to the other side having lasted only a few seconds. He retreated from the swirling black hole, realizing his apartment had transformed into a lethal hazard zone. He reached for his phone, realizing he needed to report the strange anomaly to the authorities. Outside, the Dungeon Investigation Division has already arrived at his doorstep. Upon opening the door, he was met by a polite young officer instead of the heavy military force he had anticipated. The agent adjusted his cap, staying remarkably composed despite the magical crisis unfolding around him. He offered a polite introduction with a smile, ready to begin his inspection of the unauthorized dungeon gate. Elsewhere, Kaya fully embraced her freedom, taking a relaxed shower without a single worry on her mind. Her phone lay on the bed, displaying a message that was about to sour her entire mood. She hums contentedly amidst the steam, completely oblivious to the spatial emergency her manager is currently fighting to resolve. As she washed away the day's fatigue, she took a moment to appreciate the quiet solitude of her new lifestyle. While soaking in the bath, she felt herself blush as her thoughts drifted toward her partnership with the manager. As she thought back to his determined smile, her heart viewed the memory through a romantic light. She let out a soft giggle, clearly excited by the prospect of them working together as an exclusive team. She stepped out of the bath feeling completely refreshed, her skin still glowing from the warmth of the water. As she finished getting dressed, she remained completely unaware of the threat unfolding back at headquarters. The sudden vibration of her phone jolted her, pulling her back from her wandering thoughts. Picking it up, she found a message from the manager, despite having expected a strategy update. Instead, she let out a shocked scream upon reading that a dungeon had manifested inside his room. Returning to the apartment, the investigation team began making preparations to analyze the strange phenomenon. The officer clarifies that their department provides round-the-clock assistance for these types of supernatural incidents. Feeling guilty about the late-night interruption, the protagonist offered a sincere apology for the inconvenience. Stepping inside, the agent offered reassurance, noting that managing rogue gates was their area of expertise. Kneeling before the void, he opened his briefcase and prepared to conduct the official assessment. The officer offers an apologetic smile as he delivers news that is clearly far from what the manager wanted to hear. After scanning the gate, he discovers that this dungeon reaches deep into the earth. The high-tech scanner hummed as it analyzed the magical density to assess the potential threat level. The findings arrived quickly, confirming that this spatial anomaly was far more than just a minor glitch. This G-ranked dungeon spans 20 floors, forming a massive labyrinth within a residential apartment building. The protagonist quickly realized that living right next to a monster spawner was a logistical nightmare. With a trace of nerves, he asked for an estimate on how long the government would take to clear the area. He needed the matter resolved immediately, but administrative red tape is rarely known for its speed. The officer outlined two possible options: waiting for state intervention or hiring private mercenaries. While government aid is free of charge, it moves at a sluggish pace, leaving private services as the only fast yet expensive option. Because G-rank dungeons provide such meager rewards, seasoned adventurers rarely find them worth the trouble. Given the surge of high-priority dungeons appearing everywhere, the situation in his basement would likely remain overlooked for months. The officer confirmed his suspicions, stating that the wait time would likely extend well into the following year. Living with a void in his hallway for an entire year was a prospect he simply couldn't accept. Driven by desperation, he inquires about the private route, praying his savings can withstand the financial blow. The cost was staggering, totaling a sum that would bankrupt him several times over. His freedom carried a $2 million price tag, a staggering sum that far exceeded his current savings. He stood there in stunned silence as the crushing weight of his financial ruin finally hit home. The officer politely inquired if he should proceed with the paperwork for the slower, cost-free alternative. By handing over the paperwork, he effectively sealed the apartment's fate to be haunted for an entire year. Left with no other choice, he signs the contract and accepts his new roommate from another dimension. With the transaction finalized, the manager was left clutching a single document and a mounting headache. The agent offers a cheerful salute, jokingly advising him to call back if he ends up being eaten. As he watched the officer depart, the closing door signaled the end of his last hope for an easy resolution. Left alone once more, he reached for his phone, certain there was one person he needed to inform. He messaged Kaya to explain the situation, informing her that their headquarters had been transformed into a dungeon. Just as he was about to hit send, a sudden roar erupted from the empty void behind him. With his former boss's taunts still ringing in his ears, a daring new idea begins to take shape. His gaze settled on a metal bat, the only makeshift weapon at his disposal. Gripping the handle firmly, he resolved to finally step up and become the hero his story demanded. He envisioned himself fighting right alongside her, wishing he had the strength to be a teammate rather than just the man behind the lens. However, he soon realized that the dungeon room concept was a potential viral hit that could significantly boost their popularity. Driven by a newfound resolve, he tightened his grip on the bat and ventured into the swirling void for Kaya's sake. He discovers a hidden cavern of jagged crystals within his hallway, a landscape that is as beautiful as it is perilous. He quickly ducked behind a pillar, his legs trembling as he strained to hear any signs of nearby monsters. Peeking out, he let out a sigh of relief after confirming the immediate area was free of any danger. Having found a brief moment of safety, he reflected on the peculiar system notification that had designated his role as a merchant. Opening the holographic interface, he began to investigate the true potential of his non-combat class. The status screen confirmed his role, revealing a class that seemed more appropriate for an office than a dangerous dungeon. Understanding his lack of combat potential, he speculated that his true value might lie in support or logistics. He selected the house icon, hoping it would lead to a shop where he could purchase the items necessary for his survival. A digital shop interface appeared, showcasing icons for food, medicine, and peculiar mushrooms. As he scrolled further, his eyes widened at the sight of actual weapons available for purchase. It's a total game changer, effectively bypassing the strict legal requirements typically needed to possess dungeon equipment. Recalling the monotonous lectures on weapon permits, he realized he had just stumbled upon a major legal loophole. His finger hovered over the inventory tab, a feature that serves as a mainstay in any role-playing game. This ability functions much like a legendary item box, providing the user with limitless storage capacity. In the world of adventuring, a porter possessing this skill is treated as a high-earning VIP rather than a common servant. Shaking off the distraction, he refocused on his true objective, ensuring Kaya's success. He refused to settle for being a background character in a random party, even if it was just to spite his former boss. Driven by pride, he insists on succeeding on his own terms, aiming to build an empire from the confines of his small room. Upon returning to the shop, he realized the local currency was gold rather than the yen sitting in his bank account. The real challenge remained. How could he earn this currency without facing monsters that were far beyond his current level? Noticing a sell button, he questioned whether the system's commerce functioned as a two-way street. As he taps it, the interface instantly begins scanning the items in his possession. He was caught off guard when a sudden notification appeared, bluntly asking if he wanted to sell his equipment. He soon discovers that the system is capable of transmuting physical objects from the real world into digital gold. To his surprise, the low-quality metal bat was valued at 10,000 gold, a remarkably generous exchange rate. After doing some quick mental math, he realized the system's payout was only about half of the item's retail value. Hurrying back to his desk, he grabbed a coin to see just how far the capabilities of this interdimensional pawnshop truly went. He soon realized that the exchange rate was a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, meaning his yen held significant value in this new world. Remarkably, even a bag of stale chips is valued at 1 gold coin, allowing him to convert literal trash into wealth. He was suddenly struck by the realization that a massive financial loophole was sitting right in his room. He frantically liquidated his belongings and emptied his bank account, determined to scrape together every cent he could. The final count was impressive, leaving him with a massive reserve of over 200,000 gold. He smirked at the sight of his empty drawers, feeling a sense of relief that his hoarding habit had finally proven useful. With his pockets now full, he visited the weapon shop, ready to invest in the equipment needed to increase his power. The digital interface presented a wide variety of weapons, ranging from jagged daggers to massive axes. Scanning the available gear, he realizes that most weapons within his budget offer roughly the same stat improvements. His attention settled on a traditional design, the quintessential weapon for any hero beginning their journey. He spent 100,000 on a longsword, reasoning that its balanced design made it the most practical choice for a novice. The item's description promised a significant boost to both his strength and speed, providing the exact upgrades he required. However, upon checking his status screen, he was perplexed to find that his attributes hadn't changed at all. He stared at the readout, wondering if he had just been swindled by the interdimensional vending machine. Upon noticing the empty equipment slots, he realized he would have to manually equip his gear, just like in a video game. Focusing his attention on the inventory, he willed the digital item to materialize in the physical world. Responding to his mental command, the system caused a mysterious energy to coalesce within his palm. The sword materialized in a sudden burst of light, causing his stats to triple instantly as the upgrade took effect. He wields the weapon with effortless grace, amazed by the weightless sensation granted by the magical enhancement. Fully equipped and ready for combat, he ventured deeper into the crystal cave to put his new gear to the test. He acknowledges his technique is unrefined, but the system's guidance makes him feel fully capable of dealing real damage. He settled into a batting stance, hoping his years of high school baseball would prove effective in slaying the monsters. He was suddenly struck by a wave of uncertainty, questioning if he truly had the resolve to take a life. The dungeon remains indifferent to his struggles as a shadow shifts behind the crystal pillars. His instincts flared with a warning, signaling that his first customer had finally arrived. A goblin emerged, and while it was a standard low-level enemy, it appeared much more menacing in person. Flashing a sinister grin, the creature locked its gaze on the man in the suit, seeing him as nothing more than an easy target. Letting out a piercing screech, the beast lunged forward, swinging its primitive club with unexpected agility. Stealing his nerves, he realized that even a moment of hesitation would lead to a gruesome end. He narrowly evaded the strike at the final moment, leaving the club to crash into the ground where he had stood just seconds before. By analyzing the enemy's patterns, he realized that his slight advantage in speed was the only thing keeping him alive. Reviewing the system's display, he confirmed that while the goblin possessed great strength, it was still slower than him. Despite the statistics displayed on the screen, the sight of the massive club slamming into the earth was no less terrifying. He ducked beneath a deadly strike, his body reacting purely on instinct and adrenaline. The goblin let out a roar of pure frustration, inadvertently exposing itself to a swift counterattack. Seizing the opening, he slashed through the monster's arm, causing it to disintegrate into a dark mist. The system clarifies that dungeon monsters leave no remains behind. Instead, they dissolve into shadows, leaving only loot in their wake. He stood firm, a surge of exhilaration washing over him as he realized he finally had the strength to fight back. The scenario he had envisioned countless times throughout his childhood was finally unfolding in reality. With one final piercing screech, the goblins refused to go down without a desperate struggle. No longer interested in games, he ended the encounter with a clean, decisive strike across the monster's chest. As the creature collapsed and dissolved, it became clear that he possessed the strength necessary to survive in this world. He pumped his fist in triumph, marking the first successful milestone in his journey from manager to hero. The moment is interrupted by a sudden chime, indicating that the universe has officially recognized his achievement. The words "level up" materialize before his eyes, marking the most rewarding notification he had ever received. Enveloped in a warm glow, his exhaustion vanished as a surge of new power revitalized his body. Now a level 2 adventurer, he stood tall while imagining a grand fanfare to celebrate his progress. His status screen refreshed, displaying a modest yet meaningful increase across every one of his attributes. A smirk forms on his face as he realizes he can now quietly climb to the top without anyone noticing his progress. He accessed the interface to allocate his new points, carefully calculating his build with the precision of a veteran gamer. He tapped the interface, funneling his points into physical attributes to maximize his chances of surviving the next battle. A loot screen appeared, displaying the modest rewards of a goblin claw and a magic stone. However, the appraisal results are a sobering disappointment, valuing his life or death struggle at a meager 10 gold. Understanding that hunting goblins wouldn't sustain him financially, he prioritized upgrading his equipment as soon as possible. He looked back on his 4 years as a salaryman, a life spent behind a desk focused on accumulating his savings. At 23, he found himself with nothing to show for his life, lacking both personal hobbies and any real expenses. Looking over his bank book, he stared at the 4 million yen he'd managed to save by completely sacrificing his social life. While his isolation is a tragic reflection of his life, it is this very solitude that will now provide the foundation for his revolution. He stepped out into the night, making his way toward the bank with the focused confidence of a high roller. He withdrew millions from his account, risking his entire life savings on a single massive gamble. After the system processed his entire life savings, his balance was updated to a massive 2.5 million gold. With a confident wink, Keisuke held up his phone, poised to start the most expensive shopping spree of his life. Exuding the confidence of a high roller, he tapped the screen to begin his evolution from a manager into a warrior. Recognizing that his wealth is his only true strength, he decides to invest his entire budget into high-end equipment. He clarifies that the system utilizes a standard RPG interface, featuring 4 empty slots for his equipment. He chooses to prioritize speed and agility over a bulky defense, opting to fill his gear slots with high-stat accessories instead. After scouring the shop's inventory, he spends a small fortune on 3 high-tier necklaces to significantly bolster his strength and speed. The deal was finalized instantly, causing the magical items to manifest in the air surrounding him. With a focused thought, he equipped the items, and the jewelry settled around his neck with a gentle, magical hum. His status window reflects an immediate surge, showing his physical attributes climbing well beyond human limits. A confident smirk spreads across his face as he realizes he finally possesses the numbers to support his grand ambitions. Returning to the crystal cavern, he found that the once deadly landscape now felt more like a playground than a lethal threat. He spots a goblin and lunges forward, his newfound speed allowing him to land a clean strike before the creature can even react. Leveraging his augmented strength, he forced the blade further in, successfully overwhelming the beast during their head-on struggle. The goblin let out a bewildered shriek, failing to understand how the human had suddenly turned the tides of the battle. A brutal display of combat followed as he cleared the dungeon with fluid, clinical precision. He hesitated for a second, genuinely taken aback by how effortless the fight had become thanks to his boosted stats. With his senses now sharpened, the terrifying monsters appeared to be moving in slow motion. He casually leaned back to evade the club, letting the heavy strike miss him by a wide margin. Standing over his fallen opponent, he realized that in this world, wealth is the ultimate source of power. With sweat rolling down his face, he wore a wide grin, clearly relishing the overwhelming advantage his money had bought him. He delivered a final horizontal strike, his blade passing through the goblin with effortless precision. The monster dissipated into a dark mist, marking another victory secured entirely by his personal wealth. As the particles dissipated around him, he felt like a top-tier player who had managed to reach his maximum level on the very first day. He gathered the fallen crystals, though they were a meager reward compared to the massive investment he had already made. Feeling a surge of confidence, he decided to press his luck and venture further into the dungeon's depths. Pumping his fist, he resolved to grind until he earned back every coin he had just spent. Descending to the second floor, he encountered higher-level goblins that roamed in dangerous packs. The challenge intensifies on the third floor, introducing level 6 elite enemies who are now armed with actual weapons. As he descended toward the fourth floor, he kept his sword at the ready for whatever dangers awaited in the darkness. Kasuke stopped dead in his tracks, his sharpened senses picking up a sudden ripple in the atmosphere. 2 screeching goblins dropped from the ceiling, attempting to close in with a lethal pincer attack. He coolly remarked that ganging up on a newcomer was a serious breach of etiquette. Their clubs slammed into the stone, striking nothing but the empty space he had just occupied. He leaned back with practiced ease, watching the makeshift weapons sweep past just inches from his nose. With a seamless spin, he used his high-quality blade to slice through both attackers in a single motion. The monsters let out piercing shrieks as they are cut down, their attempted ambush ending in a complete disaster. Keisuke let out a grin, realizing that facing a horde of enemies was far less complicated than managing a pop group. The dungeon exploration wasn't over yet, as a sudden presence behind him immediately put him on high alert. A massive footfall shook the earth, signaling the arrival of an even greater threat. A group of 3 stepped forward, led by a hulking goblin with a remarkably muscular build. Keisuke let out a frustrated sigh, annoyed that the dungeon was already sending a chaotic mob his way. The brute swung the massive log, forcing him to brace for the heavy impact. Faced with enemies on all sides, he reminded himself to keep his composure and take them down one by one. The goblins swarmed him from all angles, hoping to overpower him with their sheer numbers. He maneuvers through the onslaught with ease, his high speed stat rendering him a mere blur to his opponents. The club slams into the ground, kicking up a cloud of debris as he nimbly maneuvers out of harm's way. Narrowly parrying a strike aimed at his face, he remained composed as he calmly analyzed the flow of the battle. Seizing a momentary gap in the fray, he delivered a surgical strike that cut straight through the surrounding chaos. His blade glints in the shadows, carving a lethal path that forces the crowd back. He delivered a final lethal thrust, successfully dispatching the last remaining grunt. He let out a sharp exhale as the rush of combat finally began to subside. Standing among the dissolving remains of his enemies, he realized he was finally becoming proficient at his grim task. Tightening his grip on the hilt, he reflected on the straightforward cycle of turning his kills into gold. A grin spread across his face as he admitted that he was actually starting to enjoy this real-life RPG. As he peered further into the cavern, he recalled the report stating there were 20 floors in total. He understood that scanners could be fallible, and the true depth of the abyss likely exceeded their readings. Narrowing his gaze, he calculated that his current attributes would be enough to see him through to the end. The true wild card is the boss, a monster whose strength will increase at an exponential rate. Breaking into a cold sweat, he realized that rushing the boss head-on would likely be a fatal error. The effort he put into grinding paid off instantly, elevating him to level 7 and pushing his stats to superhuman levels. Glancing at the time, he realized the excitement of the hunt had caused him to lose track of the hours until late into the night. Standing within the crystalline landscape, he estimated that the walk back to his living room would take roughly an hour. A swirling vortex stands ready, acting as a bridge between the realm of monsters and the world of humans. Emerging from the void, he planted his feet firmly onto the familiar wooden floorboards. He collapsed from sheer exhaustion, finally finding safety within the stale walls of his apartment. He shuddered as he recalled the goblin ambush from his return trip, a stark reminder of the lethal dangers present on the road. As he stared up at the ceiling, the apartment he once called home suddenly felt suffocatingly small. After leaving the immense scale of the crystal caverns, his small room felt incredibly cramped, though it still provided a needed sense of security. The silence was suddenly interrupted as his phone began to vibrate, alerting him to a call he had missed earlier. Spotting Kaya's name flashing on the screen, he rushes to answer the call before she has a chance to worry. She suddenly appeared on a video call, visibly distressed after he had been unreachable for hours. Seated on the floor, he sheepishly explained that he had been preoccupied with exploring the dungeon in his hallway. As he leaned in for a closer look at the screen, his focus was suddenly pulled away by a particular distraction. Her revealing choice of loungewear catches him off guard, putting his composure to the test. Overwhelmed by sudden panic, he frantically shouted an apology before slamming the button to end the call. Kaya stared blankly at the darkened screen, puzzled by her manager's abrupt decision to end the call. Returning to his room, Keisuke buried his face in his hands, berating himself for his adolescent behavior. A notification appeared shortly after, arranging a meeting at his place the next day to coordinate their strategy. She playfully teases him by calling him a pervert, leaving him flustered and struggling to find a response. She doubled down by joking about victory underwear, leaving him too flustered to get any rest. As the night transitioned into a quiet morning, the sound of birds chirping marked the official start of his unemployment. He woke up naturally as the sunlight hit his face, finally experiencing a morning free from the looming dread of an alarm clock. Old habits proved difficult to shake as he found himself awake at 4 a.m., instinctively preparing for a job he no longer held. Instead of feeling stressed, a sense of relief washed over him as he smiled at the freedom of his empty schedule. His focus shifted toward his professional life, as he wondered what would become of the writer's channel he had built. He understood the necessity of posting an update about Kaya's departure to alert the fans. Opting for a professional approach, he began drafting messages to inform his industry contacts of his resignation. While the process was exhausting, cutting ties with professional grace was a necessary evil for navigating the corporate world. He pressed end on the mass notification, officially severing the last remaining link to his former life. The chime of the doorbell announced the arrival of the first visitor to their new headquarters. Keisuke made his way down the hall, still acclimating to the slower pace of a life no longer dictated by a corporate schedule. He nudged the door open, fully expecting to find his business partner, but instead, he was met with a completely different sight. Kaya stood at the entrance, her vibrant energy providing a stark contrast to the apartment's gloomy atmosphere. Having swapped her dungeon armor for casual clothes, she now carried a bag full of groceries. Declaring her intent to cook dinner, she treated the occasion more like a cozy date than a tactical briefing. Without waiting for an invitation, she brushed past him and made herself comfortable inside. She began removing her outer layers, signaling her intent to settle in for a while. Turning toward him with a deep blush, she was suddenly struck by the intimacy of the moment. Keisuke waved his hands in a panic, desperately trying to break the sudden romantic atmosphere. Leaning in with a sly smile, she admitted that she might have a hidden agenda. He watched in bewilderment as the calm, everyday scene quickly spiraled into chaos. She slipped on a pair of bunny ears, attempting to dismiss her bold behavior as just another joke between partners. Ignoring her choice of clothing, Keisuke gestures toward the ominous vortex spiraling in the middle of his hallway. She finally took notice of the glaring anomaly, an interdimensional rift tearing through the floorboards. He clarified that this was indeed the little problem he had been frantically texting about. She admitted she had initially assumed his hesitation was just embarrassment over a messy room or a secret stash of magazines. He let out a weary sigh, clearly offended by her assumption that he would invite her over to see that sort of collection. The two stood side by side, staring into the dark void that had replaced his welcome mat. Although he admitted to not knowing the cause, his managerial instincts were already identifying the potential. Kaya blinked in disbelief, failing to see how a lethal trap in the hallway could possibly be considered an advantage. He explains that by streaming from a private dungeon, he can effectively circumvent the guild system's tedious bureaucracy. She recognized the potential of this opportunity, noting that dungeon live streams were typically a corporate-controlled industry. A hint of worry clouds her expression as she begins to weigh the practical details. She posed the inevitable question, asking if their stream meant he was obligated to follow her into the danger zone. He nodded, fully aware that under ordinary circumstances he would be nothing more than a burden. Flashing a confident grin, he assured her that he was no longer the same person she had known just the day before. Kaya tilted her head, wondering if the mounting pressure of unemployment had finally caused his mind to fracture. He finally disclosed the truth, explaining that the dungeon had bestowed a unique power upon him the very moment he entered. A spark of hope returned to her eyes as she realized her manager was no longer just watching from the sidelines. Beaming with confidence, he explained that he had managed to clear the initial floors entirely on his own. Kaya gripped his shoulders, her wide eyes reflecting a panicked mix of shock and concern for his safety. Her expression softened into a blush of admiration as she realized her manager was much tougher than his appearance suggested. Overwhelmed with relief, she pulled him into a firm embrace, grateful to see he had emerged unscathed. To break the tension, he offered to demonstrate the unique ability he had acquired within the dungeon. A holographic display materialized in midair, providing a detailed breakdown of her physical traits. Impressed by the numbers, he confirmed that her high base stats truly made her a natural-born prodigy. As he sifted through the data, he let out a puzzled murmur after noticing something unusual. Upon inspecting her profile, he noticed a significant difference. She lacked a specific job class, unlike his own status. He calls out for an explanation, but she remains distant, seemingly lost in her own thoughts. Clearly flustered, she looked away with a deep blush, having completely misinterpreted the reason for his intense stare. She instinctively shielded her chest, her mind spiraling into romantic fantasies about the way he was looking at her. He scrambled to clarify that he was strictly assessing her combat statistics rather than staring at her. She quickly regained her composure, though she appeared slightly let down by the unromantic nature of his clarification. Refocusing on the matter at hand, he points out that his analysis ability serves as a significant strategic edge. She clasped her hands together in excitement, delighted that their lives had essentially become a video game. He attempts to explain the technical details, but she is simply thrilled to be part of the journey. He jotted down the figures to provide her with a clear visual of exactly where she stood. He transcribed the information onto a notepad, turning the digital magic into tangible ink. He concluded that the most effective way to demonstrate her power was to compare her status sheet directly against his own. As he focused on his calculations, she returned to the kitchen sink to resume her chores. She activated the rice cooker, the short beep signaling that dinner was officially underway. She announced that the meal was ready at the exact moment he finished his statistical calculations. He handed over the notepad, providing a detailed breakdown of their current stats and abilities for review. She carefully examined the document, seeing her potential clearly defined in writing for the first time. She was stunned to discover a hidden skill on her status screen, one she hadn't even realized she possessed. This discovery directly contradicts the results of the medical exam she took years ago, which had overlooked this detail entirely. He noted that while she possessed natural talent, he had to rely on high-end gear to compensate for his own shortcomings. The side-by-side comparison highlighted an uncomfortable reality. The stats he had purchased completely outclassed her own. She looked at him with newfound respect, finally understanding that the unassuming manager was the team's true powerhouse. Keisuke ponders the unusual nature of his merchant class as Kaya carefully records every detail of his status. Leaning back, she studied her notebook while carefully considering the mechanics of point distribution. A flash of inspiration struck her, leading to a brilliant but undeniably dangerous plan. Leaning in, she whispered a confidential strategy to her manager that had the power to change everything. Giving a playful wink and a point, she announced that she had discovered the perfect loophole to exploit. Back in the city center, the massive screens that previously featured their faces have been reduced to showing nothing but shadows. Back at the agency, the ball director reached his breaking point, slamming his fist against the desk in a fit of frustration. He shouted in frustration that the writer's popularity had completely bottomed out since the original duo departed. He pointed a shaky finger at his replacement, blaming their lack of skill for the sudden crash in their metrics. Back on the couch, the remaining team members grumbled about their lack of support and the fact that they hadn't had a single energy drink all day. The replacement manager gritted his teeth, struggling to control the talent that Keisuke had once managed so effortlessly. The director reminded him of his earlier boast that managing the team without Kaya would be an effortless task. The replacement breaks into a cold sweat as he realizes his supposedly simple assignment is actually a logistical nightmare. The director's tirade was abruptly cut short when he noticed an unbelievable topic trending on social media. The replacement raises his phone, betting that this debut will be the breakthrough needed to save their failing group. However, as he glanced at the monitor, his hope was instantly shattered by the sight before him. His glasses nearly slipped from his face as he struggled to comprehend the true identities of the individuals currently taking the internet by storm. A live stream notification appeared, revealing the former manager and the rogue idol looking more joyful than ever before. To understand how they managed to take the internet by storm, we need to revisit the planning session held back at the apartment. As they sat before the swirling vortex, the pair discussed the technical details behind the awakening phenomenon. Typically, an adventurer's powers awaken unexpectedly in the heat of battle, a sudden manifestation governed by little more than chance. She explained that for ordinary people, stat points are allocated automatically during combat, leaving them with no control over how their attributes improve. Keisuke soon discovers that his merchant interface grants him the power to manually monitor and alter these figures. She suggested that because he could see her status window, he might be able to manage her point distribution for her. He realized that if she had any unspent experience points, they could instantly optimize her character build. She took hold of his hand, confirming that some individuals accumulate experience even when their stats fail to update automatically. She pressed his hand against her chest, requesting that he use his unique gift to awaken her hidden potential. He turned a deep shade of red, clearly flustered by her sudden closeness and the genuine trust she was showing him. Brimming with confidence, she's certain his management skills are the key to skipping years of repetitive effort. The agreement was finalized over 2 modest cups of tea, officially marking the birth of their new guild. Jagged crystals shimmered within the dungeon's depths, providing the backdrop for their first appearance. Kaya walked ahead with a cheerful stride, delighted that her manager's apartment served as a direct gateway to another world. Keisuke worked on his smartphone, preparing the device that would soon serve as their connection to the outside world. Stabilizing the camera, he announced that they were beginning a test recording for their upcoming stream. Startled, Kaya's gaze fixed on the lens as the gravity of the situation finally dawned on her. A practiced smile quickly swept across her face, signaling her readiness to perform for the invisible audience. As they continued their descent, she inquired about the local creatures, leading him to clarify that the first 5 floors were strictly goblin territory. Just then, a shadowy figure emerged from behind a pillar, blocking their path with clear hostility. Baring its teeth in a grin, the goblin raised its crude weapon and kept its gaze fixed on the intruders. The creature narrowed its eyes, fixing a sharp and hostile glare directly on Kaya. Kaya shuddered in disgust, visibly repelled by the monster's predatory gaze and unsettling behavior. As he continued to film, Keisuke matter-of-factly noted that goblins are infamous for preying on young women. Huffing as she crossed her arms, she decided that this fan didn't deserve an autograph after all. Accelerating instantly, she closes the distance with a level of precision that catches the lumbering monster completely off guard. The surrounding air froze instantly as jagged shards of ice began to materialize out of nowhere. Moving gracefully through the air, she manifested an intricate magic circle that unleashed a barrage of freezing energy. A massive shard of ice pierces through the goblin, ending the fight before the creature can even swing its club. The monster shattered into fragments of light, falling victim to her refined and flawless combat technique. Striking a victorious pose, she received praise from Keisuke, who complimented her efficiency from the safety of his camera lens. However, as he reviewed the playback, he noticed a subtle inconsistency in her combat statistics. Upon checking his interface, he discovers that despite her choice of a dagger, her true expertise actually lies in swordsmanship and marksmanship. He gestured toward his digital inventory, realizing he needed to provide her with equipment that better suited her specific stats. A standard longsword forms within the digital interface, ready to be manifested into the physical world. Handing her the blade, he explained that the weapon would finally allow her to tap into her true potential. Kaya accepted the gift, her face flushing as she realized it was the very same sword he had been wielding earlier. She pressed the handle against her cheek, blissfully inhaling the scent of her manager's hard work. Horrified, Keisuke questions if his body odor is truly that offensive, entirely missing the real issue at hand. Attempting to move past the tension, he suggested she try dual wielding since she also possessed a gun skill. After purchasing a magical firearm from the shop, he handed it over to finalize her new loadout. She struck a pose with both weapons, looking every bit the action hero as Keisuke nodded in approval of her impressive new look. She strapped the holster to her thigh, completing the final piece of her new combat gear. Striking a playful pose, she asked if she was capturing the lethal idol aesthetic he had envisioned. Keisuke was genuinely struck by her mastery, noting how she wielded the weapons as if they were a natural extension of her own body. She noted that her experience with daggers made the transition to short swords and firearms feel remarkably intuitive. While she continues to adjust her gear, Keisuke's professional composure slips as his gaze momentarily drifts downward. His face flushed as he realized he was staring, his mind caught in a conflict between his professional role and his natural instincts. Kaya caught him red-handed and immediately took advantage of the situation, playfully lifting her hem to tease him. Keisuke sputtered in surprise, his entire face flushing a deep, vivid shade of red. She wears a wide, mocking grin as she labels him a pervert, clearly relishing the upper hand she now holds. She asked if there were any other angles he needed to examine for the sake of the live stream. He offered a hesitant defense, arguing that staying in tune with audience demand was a fundamental part of his role. As she stepped in to adjust his tie, she began lecturing him on the specific traits that male fans find most appealing. Closing the distance until she was all he could see, she questioned whether size was truly the most important factor. He threw his hands up in surrender, pleading for her to stop before his racing heart reached its breaking point. Driven by curiosity, she asks which traits of a man women are typically expected to find attractive in return. She nonchalantly reveals she spent the whole summer admiring his physique, a confession that leaves him completely blindsided. Visibly flustered, she hid her face while admitting that she was also feeling quite excited. As they ventured further into the dungeon, the romantic tension between them became increasingly palpable. However, they aren't the only ones observing, as a sinister goblin lurks in the shadows, tightening its grip on a club. The creature's eyes remained fixed on her legs, its gaze burning with a hunger that went far beyond simple appetite. It watched her with a predatory gaze, biding its time for the perfect moment to strike. Saliva leaks from its maw as the creature acts on pure primal instinct, making it far more unsettling than the others. Kaya continued on her way, entirely unaware that she had just become the mark of a lurking predator. Lunging from the shadows, the goblin caught her by surprise and seized her from behind in a repulsive hold. As the claws sink into her, the unexpected violence of the attack leaves her frozen in place with shock. She gasped for air, her struggle proving futile as the monster's hold grew increasingly tight. Tears welled in her eyes as the creature's tongue slid across her face, turning the terrifying moment into a living nightmare. Keisuke's expression suddenly darkened, and the light-hearted mood vanished as a chilling anger took hold of him. Moving with blinding speed, he delivered a powerful kick that struck the goblin's face with crushing force. He followed through with a heavy kick, sending the attacker hurtling away from her with immense force. Letting out a furious roar, he warned the creature to keep its hands off his partner. Kaya stood frozen, caught off guard by the sudden wave of bloodlust coming from her usually gentle manager. The goblin staggered back, clutching its face where a civilian's shoe had just landed a forceful blow. The creature let out a pained shriek, realizing too late that its target was far more dangerous than it had initially anticipated. Keisuke stood firm, his polite corporate mask giving way to a cold, battle-ready intensity. He plants his feet and readies himself as the dungeon begins to ramp up the intensity. A swarm of goblins suddenly poured from the darkness, encircling the pair in a calculated ambush. Panic set in for Kaya as she realized they were outnumbered 10-1 by a mob of armed and hostile locals. Keisuke moved to shield her, raising his hand to signal that she should remain behind him. He asserted that his duty was to protect her, delivering a punch that landed with massive force. Kaya looked on in wide-eyed surprise, her heart skipping a beat at his sudden display of chivalry. He declared he would clear out the trash immediately to ensure they could return to their filming schedule. Unsheathing his costly blade, he delivered a horizontal strike powered by his overwhelming pay-to-win stats. The impact plowed through the horde, scattering the goblins in every direction like a perfect strike. Within moments, silence reclaimed the room as the entire horde dissolved into fading particles and scattered loot. Turning back with a calm smile, he casually dusted off his suit as if he had only just finished a light stroll. He checked on his star talent to see if she was injured, remaining completely unaware of the emotional turmoil she was actually facing. He offered a quick apology for the holdup, sporting a charismatic smile that felt entirely out of place in such a grim dungeon. Kaya sank to her knees, her mind reeling as she tried to process the incredible display she had just witnessed. As she gazed up at him, a flush crept across her face, signaling that her simple admiration was evolving into a far more intense feeling. Keisuke tilted his head, puzzled as to why she was eyeing him with such intense hunger. She blurts out an unexpected proposal, only for him to quickly remind her that the entire scene is being broadcast live. Feeling a bit awkward, he turns back to his duties and raises the phone to initiate their equipment test. Settling into a crouch, Kaya attempted to divert her attention by brainstorming potential names for their new channel. In an effort to remain professional, she suggests a title that places the focus entirely on herself. However, they immediately fell into an argument over the branding strategy, bickering like an old married couple. She hesitated, realizing that accepting a solo title would mean overlooking the man who had just saved her life. Keisuke brushed the concern aside, maintaining that a manager is supposed to remain inconspicuous anyway. Looking up with a pout, she argued that someone with his level of skill had no business staying in the shadows. Ignoring his reluctance, she insisted he join the performance and pulled him directly into the spotlight. Keisuke finalized the stream settings, his hands trembling slightly as the moment to go live approached. They gripped hands in a mutual show of determination, solidifying their alliance against the world. He gives a rigid wave toward the camera, attempting to hide his unease with a forced smile. Deep down, he was filled with anxiety, fearing that his role as a male manager might alienate her most dedicated fans. Kaya immediately picked up on his hesitation, her expression darkening as she grew frustrated by his clear lack of confidence. They established their temporary studio in the hallway, positioning it right beside the ominous, swirling vortex. The smartphone sat poised on its tripod, ready to document the beginning of their revolution. Kaya immediately corrected her posture, shifting from a playful companion to a focused professional idol. She took a brief moment to close her eyes and compose herself just before the broadcast went live. As the broadcast goes live, she introduces herself with seasoned composure, officially reclaiming her identity. She wasted no time in announcing her departure from the corrupt agency, delivering the news with a smile. Keisuke records from the sidelines as she announces her decision to continue her diving career as a freelancer. With a casual gesture toward the dark mist, she introduced the hallway's dungeon as if it were merely a new piece of furniture. Messages began to populate the chat as viewers expressed a mix of confusion and curiosity regarding the bizarre setting and the unfamiliar face on screen. Throughout the city, people stopped in their tracks as the notification appeared on their screens. The comment section surged with activity as the algorithm picked up on the sudden wave of interest. Keisuke watched the metrics closely, his pulse quickening as the viewer count began to rise. A smirk of vindictive satisfaction crossed his face, serving as a silent challenge to the boss who had let him go. Kaya flashed a radiant smile at the camera, her natural charm instantly drawing the audience in. The signal emanated from the modest apartment, quickly reaching a vast audience of viewers. Keisuke makes his entrance, finally unveiling the secret partner behind the operation to the public. She apologized for the unexpected news, flawlessly maintaining her persona as a modest idol. The chat erupted in disbelief as fans struggled to process the reality of their favorite star going rogue. Everyone pressed for answers, curious to know why she had walked away from the security of a major label. She brushed aside the tension with a playful gesture, maintaining a light yet mysterious atmosphere. She gave a playful wink, casually brushing aside the corporate power struggles as nothing more than a simple twist of fate. Struck by how adorable she was, Keisuke found it nearly impossible to maintain his professional composure while on air. She revealed her new career path to the public, seeking their encouragement as she rebranded herself as a dungeon streamer. Cameras captured the scene from every perspective, broadcasting their declaration of independence to the entire world. Standing side by side, they are determined to prove that success is possible even without the backing of a major agency. Keisuke films the scene from an elevated angle as Kaya asserts that she and her manager are a package deal, regardless of the agency's stance. Bowing low to her digital viewers, she thanked them for their continued support after such an unexpected change in her career path. Flashing a warm smile, she promised to continue her dungeon raids, reassuring her fans that more of the content they enjoyed was on the way. Keisuke watched intently as she detailed her strategy for balancing the demands of high school with life-or-death combat. She then delivered the night's biggest surprise, casually revealing that their new headquarters was located right inside the manager's apartment. A swirling black void manifests in the hallway, confirming that her claims about the location were entirely serious. Blushing deeply, she described the hazardous anomaly as a love nest, which immediately ruined the professional atmosphere. Keisuke nearly fumbled the camera, his mind racing as he silently urged her to stop provoking the shipping rumors during the live stream. She pointed out that the official clearing schedule was backlogged for months, leaving them with no choice but to take matters into their own hands. With the explanations finished, she leaves the comfort of the living room and ventures into the unknown. With the agility of a rabbit, she leaped into the vortex, leaving the chat room stunned by her sudden departure. They materialized within the crystal cavern, and as the view adjusted to the dim light, the audience marveled at the seamless transition. She unsheathed the high-quality sword he had purchased, striking a pose that blended combat readiness with a casual charm. Once Keisuke gave the all-clear, he directed her toward the first group of enemies lurking in the shadows. The dungeon didn't keep them waiting for long, as a massive, jagged shadow soon loomed over the pair. Keisuke unenthusiastically introduced the stream's first guest, a goblin who bore a closer resemblance to a mugger than a fan. He narrowed his gaze through the lens, his enhanced analytical skills immediately calculating the creature's threat level. Kaya remains completely unfazed, her expression shifting into a confident smile that signals she has the situation entirely under control. She nonchalantly presents the monster to her viewers as if it were a mere prop, noting that the dungeon is currently crawling with them. Wasting no time, she lunged forward, becoming a blur of motion as she began the extermination. Before the creature could even lift its club, her blade struck home, carving a sharp line across its face. Utilizing her momentum, she vaults over the creature, turning the fight into a fluid display of acrobatics. A look of pure shock washes over the goblin's face as it realizes too late that its target is at a much higher level than expected. The defeated beast plummeted, crashing onto the crystalline floor with a heavy and resounding thud. She lands with poise and immediately shifts her focus to the next adversary, her seamless movements making it clear she has undergone professional training. The second goblin stood paralyzed as it finally sensed the overwhelming threat closing in. Moving with a lethal rhythm, she systematically cut through the pack with perfect precision. Her gaze narrowed in concentration as she let out a fierce shout, pushing her newly enhanced stats to their absolute limit. A flash of steel severed the monster's limb, sending a spray of dark ink into the air, letting out a pained howl. The creature hops on one leg as the overwhelming difference in their power finally becomes clear. Kaya raised her magical firearm, her relaxed composure instantly sharpening into a cold, lethal focus. With a single shot, the target was eliminated, instantly transforming into a pile of loot on the cavern floor. Refusing to waste time celebrating, she evaded a reckless club swing and immediately began preparing her next move. The battle unfolds as a seamless blend of gunplay and swordsmanship, executed with the precision of a choreographed action sequence. As Keisuke documented every moment, the chat moved at a lightning pace, filled with viewers stunned by her flawless accuracy. As the goblin dissipated into smoke, Kaya remained standing, having firmly established her dominance over the hallway dungeon. Briefly dropping her act, she playfully stuck her tongue out and thanked the monster for its participation. While posing with her new gear, she credited her manager's clever suggestion to arm her with a gun. Keisuke filmed the scene with a satisfied smile, noting that the Gunzord style was already proving to be a massive hit with the audience. Checking the counter, he was thrilled to see that over 1,000 people were already tuning in for their modest test run. The dungeon doesn't take kindly to being ignored, and a goblin soon emerges to disrupt the broadcast. Sensing a sudden wave of bloodlust from behind, Keisuke realized too late that the cameraman was far from a neutral observer. A primitive club swung downward, aiming to pulverize both the man and the device he held. Driven by pure instinct, Keisuke unleashed a high kick that completely defied his unassuming appearance as a salaryman. The goblin's face collapsed from the force of his stat-boosted kick, launching the creature across the room. In the midst of the scuffle, the smartphone slipped from his grasp and landed face down on the rocky ground. Kaya watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how her civilian manager had just neutralized a monster with a single kick. Indicating his accessories, he explained that his advantage was simply the result of high-tier, pay-to-win gear. Her sense of wonder quickly turns to dread, as she realizes he likely drained his entire life savings just to obtain that power. Letting out a nervous laugh, he skillfully sidestepped the question about his finances as if he were evading a lethal strike. He was forced to confront the sobering reality that a part-time job might be his only way to keep them fed. He reflected on the strange irony of his life, clearing dungeons by day, only to flip burgers at night just to make ends meet. Suddenly remembering the live stream, he snatched his phone from the floor and realized they had been broadcasting nothing but dead air. The chat erupted in panic as viewers questioned whether they had just witnessed the manager's death on a live stream. Quickly shifting the focus back to his star, he signaled to wrap up the show before the situation could spiral any further. With a quick nod, Kaya's worried expression vanished as she seamlessly returned to her persona as a cheerful idol. She gestured toward the lens, reassuring her frantic fans that the incident was nothing more than a minor stumble. Striking a final heart pose to charm her audience, she promises that their next outing will be a true adventure. As soon as the stream went offline, she slumped back with a pout, certain that the entire broadcast had been a total failure. Keisuke offered a reassuring smile, noting that they had managed to capture something truly special for their first attempt. She quickly proposes another run for the following day, but Keisuke points out that her commentary still requires significant improvement. He advises her on how to be more discreet, attempting to protect her idol reputation from a self-made scandal. She playfully retorts that if dropping hints is too risky, she should simply announce to everyone that they are a couple. Raising a finger, he explained the industry's golden rule: never let the fans see even the slightest hint of a boyfriend. He describes a grim scenario where her fans might riot and burn their collections if they even suspect she's in a relationship. She gave his chest a playful poke, teasingly claiming she just wanted to avoid any backlash for being too cute on camera. Checking the comments, he broke into a sweat as it became clear she was completely ignoring his professional advice. She chuckled while watching the playback, seemingly unconcerned by the public relations nightmare her flirtatious behavior was bound to trigger. She remained transfixed by the screen, replaying the footage of her rescue with a look of genuine admiration. She pressured him to repeat his earlier declaration, forcing him to relive the awkwardness of his unintended heroism. Scratching his cheek awkwardly, he wondered if his attempt to look cool had actually worked, or if it just came across as cheesy. She admits to recording his voice for her private use, leaving him visibly flustered by the intensity of her fixation. Her face lit up with a bright smile as she remarked that this was easily the best part of her day. Witnessing her sincere joy, he abandons his lecture and offers a soft, defeated smile instead. He concludes that as long as she stays happy, a manager of his caliber should be more than capable of handling the resulting chaos. Heading back toward the exit, they officially marked the completion of their first successful dive as independent adventurers. The focus shifts to the exterior of their modest base, where the true weight of administrative duties begins. Returning to the desk, Keisuke shifts his focus back to editing while Kaya takes a moment to unwind with some tea after the fight. He explained that he needed to refine the raw footage for the benefit of viewers who had missed the live broadcast. He pulled up their channel page and immediately began strategizing the best titles and thumbnails to boost their click-through rate. He mapped out a strategy for monetization, fixating on the specific subscriber count required to cover his rent. Glancing to the side, Kaya realized that every moment of their date was being carefully curated for the public eye. With a bright smile, she hands over her entire income, treating her personal savings as if they were their shared funds. In a state of panic, he warned her that embezzlement is a criminal offense, insisting that her money should remain hers alone. Fidgeting with her hair, she shyly remarked that it's only natural for married couples to share their assets. He stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the casual suggestion that they were already a married couple. A mental conflict ignites as his professional standing as a manager clashes with her delusion of being his wife. Dismissing the fantasy, he decided to earn his own living as an adventurer while he still had enough funds to support himself. Flashing a confident smile, he pledged to grow strong enough to protect her without relying on her status or wealth. His sudden display of resolve caught her completely off guard, leaving her speechless and visibly flustered. With a visible pout, she turned away while offering her personal savings should he ever find himself in a financial bind. Settling back into his seat, he flatly rejected the proposal, insisting that a manager should be responsible for their own equipment. As he stared at the monitor, he found himself completely drawn in by the test footage they had just finished recording. Even through the digital screen, her natural charisma stands out far more than any rehearsed performance. The genuine delight she took in handling the firearm added a layer of charm he hadn't anticipated. His professional guard momentarily slipped, and with a slight blush, he voiced exactly what was on his mind. He voices his thoughts aloud, remarking on how incredibly cute Kaya looks and catching her completely by surprise. He gazed at her with sincere admiration, entirely unaware of the profound impact his words had on her. She shielded her face, screaming internally as she struggled to process such a direct compliment. He attempts to clarify that he was strictly referring to her marketability, but she is already fishing for a romantic confession. He confidently asserts that she possesses the talent to eventually outshine every other streamer in the industry. Strengthened by his absolute faith in her, she offered a smile that was even more radiant than before. As he watches her, he realizes that her radiant expression is actually her most formidable strength. His mind wandered back to the past, recalling the chance encounter that first brought them together. Rather than a typical dungeon or office, the events unfolded under the vibrant neon lights of a karaoke district. He remembered wandering the hallway, searching for a private spot to sing and release the frustrations of his corporate life. He paused outside the door, captivated by a voice that sounded far too powerful for such a run-down rental room. Believing he had reached his own room, he grabbed the handle, unaware that this simple mistake would change his life forever. When the door swung open, it revealed that the room wasn't vacant, but was instead the stage for a private solo performance already in progress. Inside, a younger Kaya sang with intense passion, completely absorbed in the melody. He paused at the threshold, momentarily captivated by the vibrant energy and joy she exuded. Instead of performing for an audience, she sang simply out of a genuine love for the music. Although she had entered his room by mistake, she was so deeply preoccupied that she didn't even notice he was there. He found himself captivated by the expression of pure joy on her face as he watched her sing. Acting on instinct, he pulled out a business card before his mind could even register the movement. Without hesitation, he scouted the stranger on the spot, inviting the woman with the microphone to join his agency. Driven by the industry's demand for profit, 2 additional girls were soon brought in to transform the act into a marketable group. Driven by a desire for recognition rather than mastery, these newcomers quickly altered the team's atmosphere. A growing divide between artistic integrity and the pursuit of fame left Kaya feeling like a stranger among her own teammates. Returning to the present, Keisuke types with intense focus, determined to finally give that lonely girl the recognition she deserves. With one final click, the editing process was complete, and they officially uploaded their debut video for the world to see. The thumbnail highlights Kaya wearing a bunny ear headband, a strategic choice made to boost the video's click-through rate. Keisuke raises a fist in triumph, while Kaya expresses her gratitude for his guidance throughout their first independent project. Her expression softened as she whispered that she was the one who should be thanking him for the opportunity. Bowing low, she gave her word to serve as the dedicated face of their fledgling 2-person agency. With a renewed sense of determination, she vowed to achieve enough fame to make everyone who ridiculed him regret their actions. Stunned by her sheer determination, Keisuke realized her motivation wasn't just personal. She was fighting to clear his name as well. Leaning back with a relaxed smile, he encouraged her to set aside her heavy burdens and simply focus on enjoying the journey for the time being. He reminded her that wealth and fame were secondary, emphasizing that his true priority was her freedom to pursue her passion without being bound by corporate interests. Inwardly, he conceded that he still needed to earn enough to cover his basic needs and stay fed for the time being. Returning to the logistics of the situation, he suggests she head home for the night while he prepares a way to explain her resignation to her parents. His expression soured as he realized how awkward it would be to explain to her parents that he was the one who persuaded their daughter to quit her job. Kaya immediately jumps to conclusions, mistaking the meeting with her parents for a marriage proposal and blushing intensely at her own imagination. He scrambled to clear up the confusion, while she sulked over being sent home instead of getting her sleepover. Choosing to act like a gentleman, he grabbed his coat to escort her home, grateful to delay the intimidating meeting with her parents for another time. They ventured out into the night, leaving their apartment and its interdimensional tenant behind for a few hours. Back on the server, the video remains at 0 views, marking the modest start of what would soon become a legend. Suddenly, the algorithm kicked in, causing the view count to skyrocket from single digits to 10,000 in an instant. As they walked along the quiet street, Kaya boldly requested a spare key to his apartment, wanting the freedom to train whenever she pleased. After weighing the logic, Keisuke realized that granting her round-the-clock access to the dungeon was actually a sound, strategic decision. Reaching into his pocket, he concluded that trust was the most essential foundation for their partnership. He handed her the spare key, completely unaware that she viewed the gesture as a serious romantic commitment. Cradling the small metal fragment as if it were a sacred treasure, she vowed to protect it with her very life. She beamed with joy, clearly thrilled to finally have a lasting connection to his home. After parting ways at the corner, their bond felt more solidified than ever, and she headed home with a noticeable sense of joy. After returning to his vacant apartment, Keisuke decided to channel his restless energy into scouting the deeper floors by himself. He traverses the dungeon's wooden walkways, charting the path down to the 10th floor in preparation for their next stream. The dungeon's welcoming committee was already prepared, as a pack of goblins immediately spotted the intruder on their territory. A nervous smile crossed his face as he realized that scouting alone might have been more reckless than he initially thought. Relying on his superior pay-to-win stats, he charges into the fight and transforms the ambush into a completely one-sided beatdown. As the confrontation ended with his enemies defeated, it was clear that his immense wealth had proven far more effective than any blade. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he noted that the 7th floor's sudden increase in difficulty was proving to be a serious challenge. Taking a quick break, he checks his phone, grateful that modern dungeon crawling still offers full 5G coverage. His eyes widened when a notification caught his attention, revealing a sudden surge of unexpected activity on their newly created channel. Though he only anticipated a small audience, his notifications were soon flooded with hundreds of incoming comments. In just 24 hours, the view count climbed past 5,000, an achievement that seemed impossible for such a new account. He pumped his fist, realizing the writer's audience had transitioned much faster than he had anticipated. He gazed at the subscriber count in disbelief, stunned to see that 3,000 people had already signed up for Kaya and the manager's dungeon capture channel. The comment section overflowed with encouragement as fans celebrated the idol's return and praised the high quality of the broadcast. His relief quickly turns to panic, however, when he notices a new video has been uploaded without his authorization. The thumbnail depicts Kaya alongside a teddy bear, styled like an unvetted and amateur production. His managerial instincts immediately flared, knowing that unvetted footage is often the catalyst for a public scandal. His hand trembled as he pressed play, silently hoping she hadn't just sabotaged her career. The video begins in Kaya's room as she greets the audience with a smile that feels both welcoming and deceptively dangerous. She cheerfully summarizes her resignation, painting the workplace drama as nothing more than a series of ordinary circumstances. She then delivered a surprising revelation, introducing her partner not as a professional handler, but as the man who had resigned alongside her. Leaning in with a look of pity, she introduced him to the world as her unemployed virgin manager. She clarifies that she offered to cover his expenses since he's broke, but he stubbornly turned her down. Keisuke shouted at his phone in frustration, insulted that she had decided to air his celibacy for the whole internet to see. Continuing her pitch on screen, she explains that the channel is a collaborative effort between two partners. Holding the bear aloft, she declared that as equals, they would split the profits rewards 50-50. She basked in her own cleverness, clearly satisfied with how she had finally maneuvered him into accepting her money. Bowing politely, she asked the audience to support their unique two-person operation. The video concludes with a radiant smile, the kind that instantly charms viewers into overlooking any previous oversharing. Keisuke struggled to catch his breath, gripped by the fear that revealing a male partner would incite a massive backlash from his fans. To everyone's surprise, the comments remained wholesome, with fans laughing along at the unemployed virgin label instead of reacting with outrage. He gritted his teeth as the chat turned him into a meme, realizing that his dignity was the price he had to pay for their success. As he regains his composure, his mind wanders back to his former subordinates, questioning how the traders are managing in his absence. He browses the industry message boards, curious to see if his former agency has finally faced any repercussions. Online discussions grew increasingly hostile as fans lashed out at the remaining members for their disastrous, unscripted broadcast. As he scrolled through the comments, he was relieved to see that the fans were fixated on Kaya's improved appearance rather than his own lack of a job. The unemployed virgin label followed him everywhere like a permanent digital tattoo, causing his eye to twitch in frustration every time it appeared. Fortunately, the public response was overwhelmingly favorable, with fans remarking that Kaya looked more energetic and genuinely happy than she ever did during her agency days. Keisuke cracked a smile, accepting his role as the punchline as long as it meant the audience continued to support her. Reflecting on their filming session, he felt a deep sense of gratitude that she had accepted him as a partner despite his lack of powers. He scratched his head, concluding that he needed to stop worrying about his reputation and prioritize the task at hand. He realized that the most effective way to quiet his critics was not through arguments, but through undeniable success within the dungeon. Clenching his fist, he vowed to become strong enough to shoulder the weight of their shared dreams, determined to move past the mockery of his reputation. His concentration was suddenly broken by a ringtone echoing through the crystal cavern, a jarring sound that felt completely out of place in a dungeon. Glancing at the screen, he stopped cold upon seeing Karin, one of the girls who had abandoned them in favor of the agency. His expression clouded over as he thought back to the two members who stayed behind, having prioritized corporate security over their loyalty. He eyed the phone with suspicion, questioning why she would reach out now after having already severed their connection. Adopting a polished, professional tone, he answered the call and acted as if everything was completely normal. Standing in the heart of a monster-filled dungeon, he casually checked in to see how she was doing. Karen immediately began to ridicule him, finding humor in his non-existent subscriber count and underwhelming debut. Keisuke felt genuinely puzzled, questioning why she continued to watch his content if she looked down on him so much. Laughter echoed from the other end as his former students found amusement in his current struggle. Listening in silence, his manager's intuition picked up on a strange presence coming through the line. His eyes widened as he realized that the girls weren't the only ones listening in on the call. Interrupting them, he sternly questioned if they were supposed to be working, fully aware that their boss was likely observing from nearby. The laughter quickly fades as a deeper, more hateful voice begins to dominate the conversation. Takano, the bald director, expressed his frustration that Keisuke had been consistently ignoring his phone calls. The villain sneers as he lectures him, claiming that raw talent is essentially worthless without the industry connections only a major agency can provide. Keisuke maintains an unreadable expression while the boss arrogantly outlines every reason for his inevitable failure. Takano ridiculed the new channel, arguing that trying to monetize high schoolers without any real support was a lost cause. Keisuke closed his eyes, finally acknowledging that he no longer felt any connection to the man. He forced himself to stay level-headed, refusing to let the insults pull him back into a negative headspace. Shouting back in defiance, he informed his boss that he was done listening and prepared to cut the call. Meanwhile, the boss remains indifferent to the girl's desperate pleas for Kaya to return home. With a single tap, Keisuke ended the call, effectively severing his final connection to his former life. The trio of snakes burst into laughter, thoroughly amused by their former manager's struggle against the corporate system. Takano pointed a mocking finger at the phone, labeling him unemployed while the girls giggled like schoolyard bullies. Having reached his limit with their insults, Keisuke abruptly ended the call to silence the toxic exchange. He held the phone in a white-knuckled grip, determined to resist their toxic influence. Standing in the dungeon, he reaffirmed his commitment to making Kaya a top-tier star, regardless of any outside criticism. Steeled by a firm resolve, he continued his descent into the abyss until he arrived at the crystal-covered 8th floor. With a self-assured smile, he stepped onto the new level to scout for hazards before bringing his partner along. His arrival was met with immediate hostility as a high-speed projectile whistled past his face. He narrowly evaded the projectile, watching it collide with the wall with the sheer force of a cannonball. Quickly shifting into a combat stance, he scanned the shadows for the sniper who had nearly landed a lethal shot. A squad of goblins emerged, equipped with primitive clubs and a seemingly endless supply of projectiles. Beads of sweat form on Keisuke's brow as he realizes these enemies are a far cry from the mindless grunts he encountered on the upper floors. His analysis skill identified a level 12 goblin, revealing that the creature possessed a troublesome ability called stone throwing. He studied the skill's name, questioning whether it signified a magical empowerment or simply a display of physical strength. He weighed the odds, certain that his premium stats would still outperform their raw power. Relying on the durability of his gear, he lunges forward to close the gap before they have a chance to reload. Another goblin soon stepped forward, readying an attack with clear, malicious intent. With a sinister grin, the creature's arm began to glow as it wound up for a high-speed throw. It launched the stone with such immense speed that the simple rock became a deadly projectile. Keisuke was forced into a desperate dance of evasion, dodging a relentless hail of projectiles that shattered the ground beneath him. Maneuvering through the surrounding mayhem, he realizes that bringing Kaya along without scouting first would have been a complete disaster. Examining the impact crater, he noted that the stone was lodged deep within the solid rock. Upon closer inspection, it becomes clear the projectile is infused with magic, making it far denser than ordinary stone. He grimaced, well aware that even a single blow could prove fatal to Kaya and bring her career to a permanent end. Deflecting a shot with his sword, he confirmed that his decision to face the firing squad alone was the right one. Taking advantage of a momentary distraction, a goblin attempted to stomp him, but his speed allowed him to easily evade the cheap shot. With a rapid counter kick, he sent the ambusher crashing back into its allies. As the horde ramped up their offensive, the air grew thick with a relentless barrage of magical stones. Keisuke found himself trapped in the center of a lethal array of pitching machines, surrounded on all sides. Adjusting his grip on the sword, he tapped into his high school baseball experience to treat the dungeon like a personal batting cage. Letting out a roar of defiance toward the horde, he resolved to send every incoming attack right back at them. Displaying flawless technique, he deflected the lethal magical stone as if it were nothing more than a routine practice pitch. The counterattack was lethal, causing the goblins' heads to shatter as their own weapons were turned back against them in a triple strike. Taking a moment to steady his breathing, he realized the 8th floor would require a far more careful approach than the previous levels. However, the adrenaline of the fight evaporates the moment he recalls a real-life responsibility he had entirely overlooked. A quick look at his phone sends him into a panic as he realizes he has only minutes left to reach the adventurer licensing exam. Leaving the dungeon run behind, he sprinted back toward civilization while pushing his agility stat to its absolute limit. He reached City Hall, gasping for air and drenched in sweat, gazing up at the daunting administrative building he now had to navigate. Kaya was already waiting, visibly irritated that her manager would keep her hanging on such a significant day. He bowed deeply in shame, offering a desperate apology while she stood by his side, looking remarkably like a supportive girlfriend. She pointed a finger with a playful grin, asserting that as his wife, it was her responsibility to oversee his most significant milestones. Shaking off the romantic fantasy, he begins to panic as he realizes they are about to miss their check-in deadline. He hurried toward the reception, fully aware that this qualification course was the essential step to legitimizing their work. He clarifies that the exam results will establish his official rank, a status that ultimately dictates their level of access moving forward. Stepping into the hall, he steeled himself for the performance, knowing this was the vital first step toward making her a top-tier star.